So good afternoon, everybody. It's Thursday, it's nearly the weekend, not long to go. My name is Christabel Shepherd and I'm NACE's Challenge and Curriculum Development Director, as well as being the Executive Head of Hollybrook and Copthorne Primary Schools in Bradford. So during our session today, please put any questions you have into the Q&A or the chat box, and there'll be an opportunity for me to look at your questions and do my very best to answer them at the end. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to set my timer on my phone so that I don't go over time. Because anybody that knows me knows that this can sometimes be an issue, and I'll just keep an eye on that. We'd also be really grateful if you could add your school to your name on Zoom, where you can see that there, so that we can actually have a clear overview of the attendees. Thank you. So now I've led on More Able in 3 schools currently. And like most leaders in school, I'm involved in ensuring that our curriculum design is fit for purpose and meets the needs of our More Able, as well as providing challenge for all. And part of this process is ensuring that our assessment aims, purposes and processes are effective in terms of supporting learning and promoting that deep learning, and then evaluating the quality of that and the extent to which we've been successful in terms of its impact on learners' attainment and progress. And what we've done with this assessment audit is have a particular spotlight on the outcomes and the assessment processes that are used for More Able. What we're going for in the end is to develop teaching and assessment approaches that ensure the very best outcomes for all learners and challenge for all. So in this respect, I'm actually using NACE's assessment audit at the moment to evaluate our current approaches and drive a focus on these as part of our school improvement planning going into the new academic year. And as a school leader, I feel it's an extremely welcome and useful tool to support the development of effective assessment approaches, but also it has huge benefits in terms of supporting subject and areas of learning leaders if you're in Wales, as well as classroom practitioners, because it will help shape your provision and it will help support those leaders as well as classroom teachers in considering what their assessment processes look like. So first of all, a bit of a brief introduction to NACE for those of you not familiar. I knew from the registration list that most of you are members. So first of all, NACE is an independent charity. We work right across the education sector to improve provision for More Able learners, through which our aim is to drive whole school improvement and raise standards for all pupils. Now, we're drawing on almost 40 years experience in the field, and we offer support right across all sectors of education. Now, for those of you who know NACE well, you'll know that we are driven and underpinned by 7 core principles. And these principles form the foundation of all of the work that we do across every education context. And you can see the 7 principles there. And if you look on the right-hand side, the third one down, most people that attend these webinars are practicing teachers and leaders. And we know that you are central to providing challenging and enriching education, and that your professional development is paramount. And this forms, we hope, part of that. So in terms of the assessment audit, there are 2 core principles at the foundation of our assessment audit tool. Now, you can see there, the education of More Able learners is a whole school endeavour to be embraced by all school leaders. And when we talk about school leaders, we're talking about at every level. So we're talking about classroom practitioners, we're talking about support staff, as well as senior and middle leadership teams. The second principle that's really important in this particular webinar and in terms of the assessment audit is that addressing the needs of More Able learners will raise achievement for a much wider group of learners in school. So if we think about the effectiveness of our practices in terms of assessment, particularly for our More Able, we are likely to impact effectively on our practices for all of our learners in our school. So there are some key questions there at the bottom for you to look at. So I'll give you a second just to have a look at those yourself. Okay, so often in terms of assessment, we don't specifically consider the effectiveness of our practices in terms of our more able learners. So that last question there is of particular importance. Are our assessment processes effective in providing us with that really rich information about both the breadth and the depth of learning that our children are experiencing or gaining? And in so doing, is it driving high quality teaching and deep learning? Because we've got to remember that assessment is a vital part of the drive to ensure high quality learning and high quality teaching. Okay, so again, there's a couple of quotes here from Ofsted. We're going to look at some Estin ones in a moment. So I'll give you a moment or two to have a look at those. So if we look at the one on the left, first of all, this comes from the new frameworks for the MPQs, which I'm sure most of you will be aware have currently been updated and are starting anew in September. And one of the things they have running through them as a theme is that we must pay particular attention to securing alignment between curriculum, assessment and teaching. We can't review our curriculum design, we can't update our curriculum if we're not thinking about the assessment that underpins that. And in turn, that will then drive the quality of teaching. And as you can see on the right there, 2 quotes from the Ofsted Inspection Handbook. When used effectively, assessment helps pupils to embed knowledge and use it fluently, and assists teachers in providing clear steps for pupils. And inspectors will be looking at that. I think the important thing there is the relationship, again, between using assessment to effectively drive the quality of teaching, to make sure that that long-term learning is in place for our pupils. And I won't read out the bottom one, you have a look at that for yourself. So as schools have been reviewing their curriculum, the complementary and supporting activity is to consider how well your current assessment systems are aligned with your curriculum intentions. Now, Ofsted's and Estin's in Wales stepping back from the prioritisation of looking at schools' tracking systems as part of the inspection has resulted in schools having greater freedom to ensure that their assessment systems are serving the purpose of supporting teaching and learners' progress. So, and that's a real key change over the last couple of years. And we've also got a strong emphasis on schools being able to evidence the progress that their pupils make in terms of knowing more, remembering more, and being able to do more. And in Wales, demonstrating strength of knowledge and skills across the areas of learning and experience. So the principles of sound assessment practices bring almost any aspect or system, structure or process within reach of maximum impact. Now, assessment, as we know, is at the heart of our education system. Assessment practices serve different purposes and are complex. We know it can be done really poorly, but the need to address this is unavoidable. And this audit will help schools review the quality of their assessment practices in the round, starting with that exploration, a bit like the curriculum, of your aims and in terms of assessment, and following through to the implementation and impact of those assessment aims, that is assessment intent. Okay. So again, I'll let you read these. These are 2 statements from the new curriculum for Wales, and I think they have resonance for our colleagues in England as well. So again, a couple of moments just to have a look at those. So here we can see those statements. And again, that same thread runs through these as it does with the Ofsted processes. And what's of particular note is how effective assessment is rightly seen as a tool for ensuring each individual learner's needs are met. And this includes being challenged effectively, whilst also being seen as implicit to curriculum design and effective teaching. So again, you can see that common thread. You can't have a highly effective curriculum without effective assessment processes. So if you want a curriculum that's really going to challenge and meet the needs of each individual learner, you also need to have gone through the same thought process with your assessment. Okay, and this is a quote from an Estin report in 2019, trying to draw out what effective assessment looked like in schools. And we can see here how assessment is a strong thread running through this as well in terms of a school's good practice. And again, the explicit links between effective assessment and high quality challenge provision. So this was about an individual school, so I'll let you read that. So what the assessment audit is doing is giving us the opportunity to dig down to find out whether those things are true of our assessment processes. What is our intent when it comes to our assessment processes and approach? And it is, when it's implemented, when it's happening in the classroom or at whole school level, is it helping us to ensure that really rich learning, that deep learning for all pupils, and particularly are more able? Okay, and then we have another quote here from the Ofsted Inspection Handbook. So again, I'll let you have a little read of that one. And what's really important about this one here is this section. Teachers check pupils' understanding effectively and identify the correct misunderstandings. They use assessment to check pupils' understanding in order to inform teaching. And what tends to have happened in the past is we do that at a very superficial level in terms of the more able. It's almost a tick list of have they got, have they covered this? Do they understand that? But what we haven't necessarily done with our assessment is dig down to find the depth of that understanding or the depth of that knowledge. And we know now that that's absolutely vital in terms of our assessment processes. So again, that effective assessment goes hand in hand with effective curriculum design and implementation. And of course, the assessment will be the tool that tells us whether our curriculum is effective or not for all learners. And through the use of the assessment audit for our more able learners as well. Okay. So this slide is giving you a view, an overview of the assessment audit itself. And as you can see here, you've got it provides you with a comprehensive set of descriptors which exemplify high quality summative and formative assessment practices. But as I've said, it provides you with a more, I suppose, polarized focus on more able pupils through a series of searching questions linked to a number of different criteria. And it aligns with Ofsted, Estin, the MPQs, the early career framework and statutory assessment requirements. So it's absolutely up to date. It considers all aspects of assessment, which we'll come on to in a moment, both at whole school, department and classroom level. And it gives you a rating system that you can use. And if you are in Wales, it's available in Welsh and English. So as I said, it provides you with a newly designed comprehensive set of descriptors which exemplify that high quality assessment practice. And as I've said, that can work at a whole school level, at a department level, but also in the classroom. And there's then additional commentary in terms of the audit to encourage your consideration of the needs of more able pupils through the lens of assessment. And the audit itself is organised into 4 parts. So you've got intent, which is the aims and principles of your assessment processes, the implementation, but this is at whole school and departmental level. Then you've got a second section on implementation, which is about implementation of your assessment approaches and processes at classroom level. And then a 4th section on impact. So what's the outcomes from the assessment practices that you use in terms particularly of the assessment of that high quality work. Now, each section provides statements against which to audit current policy and practice on a 1 to 5 scale. So in terms of the audit, we're not just talking about summative assessment. There's an entire section in the audit, which you'll see in a few minutes, devoted to implementation or assessment practices in the classroom. So those assessment practices that we know will drive high quality teaching and learning for the more able, and therefore raise the bar for everyone. And in secondary schools, the assessment audit could also be completed by heads of department to gain that subject level perspective. And for each key statement, which you'll see shortly, there is a suggested source of evidence or sources of evidence, along with some key questions for more able provision. And again, these can be used to support the formation of evaluation judgments and findings. And in each case, those can then be used to form an assessment action plan and inform revision of your current school assessment, marking and feedback and generic assessment policies. Okay. So I'll give you a second to read this. I'm not going to take you through that entire slide because I've covered a lot of what it says here, but the most important point there is that first one, and that the impact section of the audit takes into account the importance of pupils' work and the definition of pupils' progress in terms of them knowing more and remembering more and having those skills that they need, as well as the outcomes in things like public examinations and so on. And what's important is that it is a complementary audit to the curriculum audit. They sit alongside each other, but there'll be more about that momentarily. So the audit has been constructed to take full account of statutory requirements. As I've said, it meets Ofsted's requirements, Estin's examples of good practice, the early career framework, the MPQs. So it's brought all those together in its design and thinking. And it's a flexible tool, so it can be used by primary and secondary schools, maintained schools, independent schools, academies, and international schools. And the audit will also enable schools to consider how well their assessment systems match with their curriculum aims and teaching and learning intentions. And this is a key area that we'll need to consider as we develop our new or redesign our current curriculum. Okay, so then what's the benefit for schools? Hopefully you've got some idea of that already. At its heart, it provides a framework to support discussion about all aspects of assessment and helps you to come to a shared understanding across all levels of leadership in the school about your school assessment aims and practices. And, you know, to be absolutely honest with you, until I use the audit, I don't think I've really considered what our assessment aims and principles, our rationale was, other than, well, we want to know how well children are doing. I certainly hadn't considered our assessment aims from the point of view of what we want our assessment to do for us in terms of our more able learners. So when you use the audit and you have the opportunity for that discussion with everybody, it will enable leaders and teachers to articulate why they use assessment and their evidence to show the impact of the effectiveness of their assessment practices. It will also help you understand what high quality assessment might look like. And again, that whole focus on the more able stops us from putting a glass inadvertently, I'm sure we're not doing it on purpose, inadvertently having a glass ceiling in terms of what our more able can achieve. So, you know, in other words, it helps us to prevent those potentially limiting views of assessment. And again, it supports that meaningful construction and revision of the school assessment policy so that it actually aligns with the goals that we want for our curriculum. There's no point having a curriculum that says, yes, our curriculum is going to challenge all learners. It's going to make sure that they are prepared for life in the wider world, that they are articulate and so on. If our assessment policies don't, then our intention in terms of our assessment doesn't align with that overall curriculum intent. So what we'll do now, again, I'll just check the time. We're fine. I'm just going to have we're going to have a bit of a dive into elements of the audit itself. So this is a section from this is a snip from the very first section. For those of you who are familiar with the curriculum audit, you can see here that the assessment audit operates in a very similar way. So each section provides statements against which you can audit your current provision. And in terms of the intent, this is from the intent section, so the aims and principles of your assessment, you've got some key statements at the beginning here on the left, and you can audit your practice against a scale of 1 to 5. So you can either use this whole school initially, or you could zoom in on an area of learning or a department, or even an individual teacher's view, so you can use it flexibly. So if you have a look at this first descriptor, there are clearly articulated assessment aims and principles, and these are underpinned by a coherent rationale aligned to curriculum and pedagogical goals and compliant with external requirements. What the audit's done for you is then had a look at that particular element, which is really important in terms of assessment development and your assessment approach, and broken it down into some key questions for you to think about, so that you can really explore the quality of your aims and principles for your assessment. So if we have a look on the right hand side there, so in the middle, the column, you've got the suggested evidence, but then you've got these key questions which focus in on specific assessment provision for the more able. So do our assessment aims and principles promote assessment as integral to learning and the shaping of future learning? Do they promote high expectations for all pupils, or are they just a sort of a yes, you've got that, you've done that little bit of learning, that's fantastic? And are they ensuring that assessment, places no inadvertent ceiling on achievement, like I've talked about already? Do our assessment aims and principles, so are we able to articulate these clearly in terms of how they represent achievement for all pupils across the breadth and depth of the curriculum, using a variety of approaches? And I have to say, hand on heart, I'm not sure that ours do. And you'll see in a few minutes, I started one of these audits so that you can see the sort of way I formulated my thinking. And then that last one there, take account of how expanding knowledge of the science of how pupils learn is changing modes of assessing what pupils know. And those questions, they're so much better than just an initial statement, aren't they? They're taking you far deeper into exploring the quality and potential impact of your assessment aims and principles, its intent, than it would be just to look at that initial statement in isolation. So you can really dig down deeply and go, are we doing that? Is it really as good as it could be? Okay, so what you do then is obviously you would rate yourselves according to where you were. I would strongly suggest that you need to justify why you've come up with a particular decision, like you would with any audit. What's guided your thinking in coming up with that score for yourself. Okay, so what I did here was I took some of those bits, some of those elements from that particular criteria. So again, it was all about, are there clearly articulated assessment aims and principles, etc. So the first two bullet points that we looked at a moment ago, do aims and principles promote assessment as integral to learning and the shaping of future learning? So I thought about this. I thought, where are we as a school? And so these are my thoughts. As a school leader, we have clear assessment approaches, but I don't think these have been clearly articulated in terms of our intent. So we're not at the bottom in our processes, but I also think we've got work to do, because it's the ability to articulate them. And so it really made me think about that. Am I able to articulate the aims? No, I'm not. And I'd be so thrilled if I go into classrooms and the staff can, and likewise subject leaders and areas of learning leaders and so on. But my view as the executive head is, I'm not sure that's the case. but I would, you know, I'm happy to be for people to argue with me about that, but that's the purpose of the discussion element. One person's view isn't, you can't just have one person do this audit, it needs to be owned by the whole school. So the next one was promote high expectations for all pupils and ensure assessment places no inadvertent ceiling on achievement. So I've given, I think we're a 3 here. I think that's in place. I think it can be strengthened in terms of the way, again, that we articulate it. But as you can see here, what I wrote was, we have high expectations of all pupils, but we need to consider how these promote the highest, not just the highest expectations for our learners, including the more able. So we need to review with subject leaders to determine whether our rationale makes it clear that our approaches need to remove any glass ceilings. So again, it's got me thinking already. Now, as I've said, the audit can be undertaken by senior and middle leaders to review their current assessment practices and identify next steps for improvement. It can be tackled in a staged way, taking a particular section or questions to work on. It's not a tool for the more able leader on their own. Going back to that NACE core principle right at the beginning, approaches, making sure that the provision for more able pupils is right, has to be owned by the whole school. However, there is a role within this for the more able lead, which I think we'll see in a couple of minutes when we come on to some of the snips from the audit. And then, as I said, an action plan can be produced and schools can work towards meeting that criteria fully. Once you've got to that point, it's likely that you should achieve highly ambitious assessment approaches, which will help to deliver the school's curriculum vision and take account of the needs of more able pupils, who often may be overlooked. So again, I've done this here for the second part of that. You can see that there was a key question within 1A, which was value and represent achievement for all pupils across the breadth and depth of the curriculum using a variety of approaches. So I put there again, I thought, oh, we're 2 there really. Need to review our assessment policy with all the staff and check that our assessment principles truly capture achievement across the curriculum and learning in depth as well as at breadth. Because again, I think a lot of assessment systems that we may have might be about the breadth, and what we really need to do, especially beyond English and maths, is to focus in on that depth of learning and make sure that our assessment picks that up. And I've just put here that I suggest we need to refine and articulate our approaches, particularly summative, in terms of the assessment beyond English and maths. And I'm not sure that subject leaders beyond those 2 subjects can actually articulate the intent for their assessment methods. I may be criticising ourselves unduly here, but as I said, the value of this is then in the discussion. And from that, so where are our priorities? What do we need to tighten up and shape up? Okay. So again, I've just given you here 2 more snips from that intent section. There's a lot more to it than this, but you've got a key question here, 1B, assessment is designed so that it is not excessive or onerous, really important. It's got to be meaningful, it's got to be effective, but nor should it place an unnecessary workload. So you can see again those key questions on the right. I'm not going to go through all of them. But for example, that bottom one and the top in 1B, is there an appropriate emphasis on high quality feedback for more able rather than quantity or regularity, including verbal, in the moment, feedback and dialogue? So it's not all relying on data collection, as in, tick boxes and, loads and loads and loads of written marking. Written marking has its written marking and feedback have their place, but it's about having that balance and getting that balance right. And then you can see a little bit from the second criteria within the intent section, which is that senior leaders can clearly articulate how they will assess the acquisition of skills and knowledge against the high expectations set out in the curriculum. And I think that's a key question for everybody, particularly for our colleagues in Wales at the moment. And what progress, can they articulate how the assessment leads to the progress that pupils are making? And again, there on the right, you've got some really good questions that allow you to delve down in terms of that subject leadership. So can leaders articulate how chosen methods will take account of more able pupils who may be working at or have the potential to work at very advanced levels compared to their peers? Does it stop? You know, you've achieved this, we think you've got greater depth, for example, and you're working at a greater depth in this subject. But is there then assessment that allows them to go beyond that, or for you to assess them beyond that? So again, you can see that joined up thinking in terms of everybody having that clear approach to assessment. And then that last question there on the right hand side, how can assessment move beyond the sampling of testing to represent the depth and breadth of pupil achievement? So some of them are quite philosophical questions for you to dig down into with your staff, but I think again, really useful in helping you to shape that clarity of vision for your assessment processes. Okay. Right, so now on to the implementation section. So that, as I said, there are two sections on implementation in the assessment audit. One is on implementation at whole school or department level, and you can see I've included some snips here of that. And again, you can see how the questions on the right support and guide you in terms of really exploring your whole school and department assessment practices. So again, if I look at 3B, subject leaders have the knowledge, expertise and practical skills to implement assessment principles and policy effectively. And I think that comes as a bit of a shock in some schools. What you're asking me as a subject leader to think about how what my assessment should look, what my assessment principles should be. So again, these questions here on the right are there to guide you. So where a subject leader lacks depth of subject knowledge to design, assess and set challenging tasks for more or exceptionally able learners, what support and training is provided for senior leaders, for example, in a primary, but it's equally as relevant to a secondary. And are relevant, more able learner issues considered by subject leaders when they are thinking about the assessments they want to see used in the classroom in terms of formative assessment and also the summative assessment for their subjects? Are they thinking about their more able learners in terms of that and in terms of the implementation of their assessment policy? So if you look at the example there, less need for practice and recall, right? But there's but not improvement steps, is it being addressed properly in terms of what the more able are being asked to do in terms of their assessment and moving them on? And they can often work beyond the taught curriculum. Is that being built into your assessment processes? And then again, a snip from the part 3 of the audit in terms of implementation at classroom level. So I'll give you a second to have a look at those two questions there, or two sets of criteria there on the left, 8B and 8F. So you can see here how the audit is digging down into what that assessment looks like in the classroom. So we've got the design, we've got your vision for your assessment in terms of whole school, in terms of subject and areas, and in terms of the classroom. And then we've got what it actually looks like in practice. What are the teachers doing? So again, if you look on the right-hand side, you've got, is teacher assessment of prior knowledge ensuring that more able pupils are not sitting through what they know and can do already? Is task design well matched to ability? So when we use retrieval practice, for example, and we're trying to assess what pupils know already, are we doing that in a way that supports us moving quickly through to take our more able to a place where they have to think more deeply in terms of that retrieval, or are they just sitting through that at the same level as everybody else? And then in class, is task design well matched to ability? Are new ideas and concepts planned to be introduced at the pace appropriate for the more able pupils? So are we using our assessment effectively to then drive the quality of teaching in the classroom? And then a bit like the subject leaders, that last question there in 8B, do teachers have the deep subject knowledge required to accurately assess the understanding of more able pupils, predict misconceptions more able pupils may have, and adapt their planning to suit? Again, we get that, don't we, from appropriate assessment systems being in place. So again, some great challenging questions to allow us to explore the quality of provision for more able, particularly in terms of assessment and how that can then drive the quality of teaching. But you can also see how those questions can be applied generally for all learners. You know, that last one there, are there opportunities for cumulative feedback to enable more able pupils to improve and complete work to an exceptional standard? That notion of exception, that we are trying to get things to an extraordinarily high level, and we need to use our assessment to effectively drive that. Okay. And then the final section of the assessment audit is in terms of the impact. In other words, what is the impact of, we hope, the high quality assessment practices we've put in place? So I've given you an example of this again from this section. There are actually 4 criteria in this section, and each one explores a different and important element of the impact of your assessment approaches in terms of attainment and progress, and crucially, the depth of learning and understanding that they are promoting. And again, with a spotlight on the more able, including those who are disadvantaged and underachieving. So there are specific criteria about that in getting you to think about the impact of your assessment processes on those individual groups. So if we take this first one, pupils' work is of a consistently high quality across all subject and curriculum areas, and pupils make good progress in their learning. Seems straightforward, doesn't it? And then we need to dive into that to really think about what that's asking. So for example, are more able learners producing work of a consistently high quality across all their subjects and curriculum areas? And is their learning durable? Will it last? Is it secure? And what if it is, then we're likely to have a highly effective assessment system. You know, this is telling us that that's right, that we're using the right processes, both in terms of formative and summative assessment. Is that learning authentic? And then, are there opportunities to go beyond the set task and explore those interests in depth to cover all the domains? So the academic, the creative, the physical, both in and out of school. And is our assessment allowing that to happen? Is it giving us the information that we need, that's letting our pupils fly? And do disadvantaged and identified more able underachievers produce consistently good work? So again, if our assessment, if our curriculum, and as part of that, our assessment practices are high quality, then the answer to these questions should be yes. But, you know, at the point of discussion, it's likely to be, to what extent do a disadvantaged and identified more able underachievers produce consistently good work? And then what we can do is we can go back and think about what we need to do to make the answer yes for all pupils in terms of the assessment processes that we put in place. Okay, as I said, I hope you've picked up on some of the benefits for school. I have, just by honestly doing section 1. I'm thinking, oh, you know, we've got a lot of work to do, and I feel quite comfortable with our new curriculum that we're implementing, but I honestly don't think we've considered the assessment enough. So what's the benefit for schools? As you can see, we've talked about the fact that there is criteria at classroom implementation level, and that can be used, as I've said, by individual teachers for self-evaluation and then for mentor discussion and coaching. And that's very, very effective in terms of early career teachers, using that as a scaffold for that discussion with them. And obviously, use of the assessment audit keeps assessment under review and allows you to action plan for those continued improvement. So it's driving school improvement again on another level. And it allows you to develop a really clear strategic view with some real joined up thinking about the different purposes of assessment and the extent to which it's allowing you to fulfill your curriculum intent. So in other words, how it's helping you to meet your curriculum goals. So in terms of getting started with it, these are some suggestions here. So again, you could start with key leaders and think about them, you know, those who are needed for the initial discussion. You can give it to everybody, just as a give me your first impression. Everybody have a copy of this and have a go at telling me where you think we are from your perspective in school, or you can start with a leadership team or a subject area. I was talking to a school this afternoon. They're looking at developing practice in maths, and assessment is a key strand for them. So they were talking about potentially using something like this, but focusing on maths as a key area for development in terms of the assessment approaches that were being used. So they were going to give it to their maths team. And then obviously plan to spend some quality time on intent, aims and principles before moving to the other sections, because as you've seen from my experience of it, just that section alone helps you to see whether your assessment principles are really clear and can be articulated, and whether they can be articulated by everybody and even by yourself. So it's good to give some time over that. It's not something that you can do quickly. This isn't a sort of half an hour job of an assessment. This is something that can actually drive your CPD, and as I've said, can then be a thread that runs alongside curriculum development or just on its own as a school improvement priority. And then obviously those questions about the more able will allow you to inform your discussions to ensure the highest expectations in terms of your assessment practice. And then while you're doing that, you know, have your assessment and feedback and teaching and learning policy and curriculum policy available so that you can reference those and say, you know, as we discuss this, does this come through our approach, or are our policies bland documents that don't really harness our vision and our approaches to assessment? And then, as I've said before, you know, while you're rating where you think you are, think about the evidence that you've got to back up your rating, why you've come up with that view, you know, where's your thinking around it? Because again, that really helps the discussion if everybody individually has articulated why they're feeling what they're feeling on that particular audit. And then you can have that really useful in-depth discussion, which will help you agree on any actions or develop some key questions there that you can then discuss. And again, particularly if you're using a staged approach to the audit, where you just take one element at a time, depending on where your school needs are. Okay, some schools want to start with impact because they think that their assessment processes, particularly in terms of challenge and the more able, are already really strong. So they often start with the intent section and then go, oh, it's not quite, it might be brilliant, but often it's not quite doing what we thought it was doing. So perhaps we need to go back now to our vision to clarify that, or back now to our whole school implementation of assessment approaches or our classroom level assessments to really check that what we thought was happening really is happening, and then it will then have the impact we want it to have. So lots of different ways in which this can be used. Again, just to check on the time. Right, so in terms of next steps and additional support, you can see there that in terms of the assessment audit, it's £150, the cost of it for NACE members, and then non-members, it's 250. So it's definitely worth being a member because you get a massive reduction on that. You can also buy half a day of consultancy. I'm just looking at this because I know my timer is about to go off and I don't want it to interrupt the, hold on, I'll just cancel. There we go, we're stopped. Hurrah. You can purchase a half-day consultancy where you can have a consultant come in and work with you on an element of that audit. You can be part of a staff meeting and so on to provide you with that bespoke support over, as regards the whole audit or an element of it, depending on what you need. There's obviously also the additional consultancy and bespoke support that NACE deliver anyway and provide. And there's also coaching and mentoring available. And then you can see on the right hand side that there's the curriculum audit. As I've said, these go hand in hand. If you do carry out the curriculum audit and you then find that assessment is an area of focus, then it's definitely worth having the assessment audit. But as I said, we're using the assessment audit in its own right because we're already partway through developing our curriculum, and it does allow you to get that really joined up approach. So the curriculum audit is actually free for NACE members and £250 for non-members. So again, really worth joining because of the raft of other benefits of being a member of NACE. And it's, I feel as a school leader that it's not expensive, and everybody in school can also join in their own right once you've got school membership. So you can have a sub account. So again, I think it's a much more cost-effective way of getting your hands on these really high quality tools to use in school and to really drive that whole school improvement. So in a minute, we're going to come on to whether there are any questions from you. But in the meantime, I just wanted to draw your attention about the different ways in which you can get in touch with NACE. So you've got the initial NACE email there if you need further information. And then you've got Twitter, Facebook, and I think that's LinkedIn now. My mind went there for a second. You had LinkedIn. So you can contact NACE through all of those different forums. There's also the Ask NACE offer, where you can book a 45-minute support call with a NACE associate to talk you through a specific area you're working on. And that can be to do with anything to do with the more able. And, it could be curriculum design, curriculum development. It can be generic pedagogy for the more able. You might be a more able lead that requires some support or wants to ask some questions. It can be around any aspect of more able provision that you want it to be. And that will provide you with support and guidance. So that's available as well. So before we finish and go back to those questions, I'd like you to just have a look at two quotes from Dylan William in his book, Embedded Formative Assessment. I have to say I'm a bit of a groupie when it comes to Dylan William. So have a look at this, because I think this summarises the link between the importance of assessment and the way that that then drives the quality of teaching. So a moment to have a look at those. So we will come back to those at the very, very end, but I thought it was worth you just having a look at those initially. So we'll go on to see if there are any questions from anybody. If you have got a question, no question is too small or too big. We'll do our best to try and answer them. Please, can you put them in the Q&A or the chat? Right, so I'll move back on to that final slide and leave you with this and say a massive thank you to all of you for taking the time. I know everyone's really tired at this time of year. And as we've said, as Karen said, if you've got any further questions, please send them to info@NACE and we will do our very best to get back to you. It's been lovely, even though I can't see you. It's been lovely. And I hope you found that overview of the assessment audit useful.